By the early 1980s, the Mafia was more powerful than ever before. It took an unprecedented effort from the FBI to challenge their power. In the space of 50 years, the Mafia had come to control entire industries in New York City. For the first time, an all-out assault would threaten their grip on the American economy.
It's a very hard thing to destroy, to put out of business. You know, you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar corporation. That's what you're talking about.
New racketeering laws gave law enforcement a powerful new weapon to fight the Mafia.
Operations to 281.
It was a battle being fought with an armory of sophisticated technology. Electronic surveillance would provide a more detailed picture of La Cosa Nostra than ever before. Secret microphones in Mafia homes would provide an insight into the heart of organized crime.
In order to really make a dent in the operations of the Gambino family, the best way to do it would be to take out the boss, and the best way to take out the boss would be to find out what he was talking about, what he was doing in his home.
Now the FBI would target the most powerful godfather in America, Paul Castellano.
Paul at the time was the most powerful of the bosses of the five families. He chaired in most of the commission meetings. He hosted most of the commission meetings. He tended to direct a lot of the activities of the commission. So here we are listening to his conversations in his house. His most powerful boss at that time was highly significant.
To penetrate the heart of organized crime was the ultimate victory in the war against the Mafia. New York City, capital of the Mafia's organized crime syndicate. 5 families run an empire which extends throughout the country. The most powerful of them all is the Gambino family.
I don't think there really is a business that you could mention that isn't touched by the Gambino family in New York. In one way or another, you're paying the Gambino family, whether it's through a union, whether it's through a distribution company, or somehow they're going to touch on whatever you get. You know, the consumer is going to pay somehow.
At the height of their power in the early 1980s, the Mafia were likened to a second government. They had the power of life and death and an enormous impact on the entire economy of America.
What really affects the people here in the United States in their pocketbooks is the involvement of La Cosa Nostra in industries, in legitimate businesses. And that's where the Gambino family was with both feet. They were involved in a whole variety of legitimate industries in the New York metropolitan area. And through that involvement, they were able to have a direct impact on the pocketbooks of the people here in New York, and indeed it trickled down and had an effect throughout the United States. When I'm talking about industries, I'm talking about trucking, I'm talking about various manufacturing industries, I'm talking about construction, I'm talking about the carting business, I'm talking about the waterfront. So there are a whole variety of industries that the Gambino family either controlled through their involvement in running labor unions, or if they didn't control, they played a very significant role in.
Control of legitimate business was the legacy of Carlo Gambino, the founder of the Gambino family. The legendary godfather passed away peacefully in the summer of 1976. His anointed successor was Paul Castellano. His inheritance was untold wealth and power. From a $1 million mansion on Staten Island, he ran a criminal empire and an army of mafia soldiers. In the 1970s, a new breed of gangster appeared on the streets of New York. Ruthless, violent, and greedy, their trade was drugs, pornography, and death. Their activities would precipitate a clash with the old guard and ultimately lead to a civil war. In Little Italy, Gambino soldiers like John Gotti epitomized the new breed. Their brash style would attract greater attention from law enforcement and the disapproval of the older generation. But no one could argue with the enormous sums of money they earned for the mafia. Typical of the new breed was another capo in the Gambino family, Roy DeMeo. He was making millions for himself and the boss of the family.
Roy was very important for two reasons. Number one, he was the muscle behind Paul Castellano. He was the, when they needed it, the DeMeo crew could deliver on orders from Nino to take care of business for Castellano. And then secondly, Roy was what we call, what they call a money maker. And through all his illegal activities, he could generate a lot of money. And not every wise guy can do that, but Roy was good at it.
Dominic Montiglio grew up as a young child surrounded by a loving Italian family. His childhood memories are like something out of The Godfather. Some of the friends and relatives that came to visit were members of the powerful Gambino family. Dominic Montiglio's uncle was Nino Gaggi. He supervised the DeMeo crew and reported to Castellano. Dominic grew up to become a trusted go-between at the highest levels of the mafia.
If Roy had needed permission to do something, you know, I would go to Paul Castellano and get the okay for Roy to do it. I would bring Paul money from Roy on Mondays. I'd go see Paul. I'd see Roy over the weekend. And he would give me X amount of money for Paul and X amount of money for my uncle, which I'd keep and give Paul his end. And then if Roy needed to see Paul for something that I wasn't privy to, I'd have to go to Paul, tell him Roy wants to see you, go back, tell Roy, oh, it's okay, you can meet him here at this time, at this restaurant or whatever. That's basically what it was.
Castellano's image as a respectable millionaire businessman was far removed from the reality of the street crimes committed by his family. The Canarsie section of Brooklyn was the center for one of their most lucrative operations. They ran a highly organized ring of car thieves. Luxury cars were stolen to order, given new identities in backstreet garages known as chop shops, and then shipped to the Middle East. Every week, hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash from this one operation alone was delivered to Paul Castellano's home. The Godfather's mansion was known as the White House, but his wealth and power came from murder and torture.
He was scared of Roy. That's what he was. Not only about how much they were doing with the pornography, the stolen cars, the drugs, and the killings, but I think he was scared of Roy because, you see, the DeMeo crew had one thing. They made you disappear. You know, they felt they could kill anyone as long as they made them disappear. And and countless people went that way. They had it down to a science. So Paul Castellano was a little intimidated, but he wanted to keep him around because of the amounts of money that they were bringing in. You know, it was massive amounts of money. The narcotics alone was bringing in $150,000 a week. So it was just one part of it. The stolen cars, they were shipping to Kuwait. That was bringing God knows how much money, you know. Pornography was bringing a lot of money. I would say that that crew alone was bringing in close to $250,000 a week. You know, that's not something you want to lose.
Car theft and murder were not normally crimes that were linked together, but for the Mafia it was all in a day's work. To protect their own profits, the DeMeo crew did not hesitate to kill. Eventually, these unsolved murders came to the attention of the FBI. Suspecting a Mafia connection, a task force was set up with the New York police, the FBI, and a special prosecutor. Artie Ruffles was the FBI case agent.
Well, actually, they killed quite a few people over cars. Their car business was very important, and they killed a lot of people over the cars.
It wasn't just the cars. From their Brooklyn headquarters, a bar called the Gemini Lounge, Roy DeMeo ran the car theft ring and his other operations, drugs and pornography. But the crew's speciality was getting rid of people. One contract was for the Godfather himself. Beneath the business suits, Castellano was as brutal as his street soldiers. When he discovered that his son-in-law was unfaithful and violent to his daughter Connie, seen with him here, he called on the services of his disposal experts. In true Sicilian tradition of revenge being a dish best eaten cold, he bided his time.
After a couple of years, the contract was put out to kill Frankie Amato. Paul used his muscle crew, the DeMeo crew, and they lured Frankie over here to the club because they had heard Frank was in the window, storm window and screen business. So they lured him over on a pretext of getting new windows and screens. Once they had him inside, then they killed him.
Subsequently, they had Paul, after a time had passed, had the DeMeo crew set him up and call him down to the apartment. And he went in and he came out in boxes. You know, so Paul had him killed. And the DeMeo crew was the ones that did it.
The killing took place in this apartment building behind the Gemini Lounge. The body was never discovered. Roy's home was a world away from Canarsie, Brooklyn, where he worked. He owned a luxury house on Long Island, where he spent the weekends and said grace before meals. In the neighborhood, he had the reputation for being a good family man. This is a home video seized by the FBI, which shows Roy DeMeo, the man on the right, in the company of his crew. Those who worked with him knew the truth about what he did, and they too became steeped in blood. Vicious young gangsters like Henry Borelli, a close friend of Dominic Montiglio, currently serving a life sentence in prison for multiple murder. Roy's cousin, nicknamed Dracula. Chris Rosenberg, a young psychopath who worshipped Roy as a father figure and wanted to change his name to DeMeo so that he could join the Mafia. By the late 70s, DeMeo had a crew of serial killers whose activities were brutal even by Mafia standards.
They were murdering 3, 4 people a week. You know, I mean, they would get depressed if they had nobody to kill. And I'm not talking about over serious stuff. I'm talking about a guy called somebody a name. And he went through what they called the Gemini method. You know, they used to call it doing the Houdini. You know, just vanish. And it winds up in the Fountain Avenue dump under 30 tons of garbage the next morning. You know, and they really just got to a point where they were scaring everybody. You know, because they were just that vicious. You know, because, you know, you do have rules where you understand I can die for this. You know, if you did it with the DeMeo crew, you never knew why you were going to die. You might have just said the wrong thing, not even realizing it. And they decided to wipe you out. You were gone. They just made a pact with themselves. That no more beatings, none of this. Then somebody gives us a problem, they disappear. You know, and then eventually Roy bought them all butcher kits that they drove around into the trunk of their cars. So they always had them with them. And they became very proficient. Because Roy at one time was a butcher, and he showed them how to, you know, take the arms off, get around ligaments, and, you know. So they became real good at it, you know.
The myth that the Mafia murdered only its own is belied by the activities of the DeMeo crew. Almost anyone could fall victim to their brutality. The art of killing and making the bodies disappear became a cold-blooded science. Their exploits in the apartment behind the Gemini Lounge were a horrific testimony to the reality of Mafia violence.
Usually, they'd get you in the apartment behind the Gemini. They'd use the reason for you to come there. And what would happen is when you'd walk in the door, usually Roy or Henry would shoot you in the head with a silencer, pistol-equipped silencer, wrap a towel around your head to stop the blood from shooting all over the place. Usually Chris Rosenberg would stab you in the heart to stop the blood from pumping. Then they take you to this bathroom and hang you in the shower and cut your veins on the side of your neck and bleed you for about 40 minutes until as much blood was out as they could get out. Then they'd put you on like a pool liner or a tarpaulin. And they would just take you apart, put you in plastic bags, and then usually in boxes. And you'd go to the Fountain Avenue dump in Brooklyn, which is it's the biggest trash dump in Brooklyn where all the refuse goes. And Anthony Senta, his uncles or his cousins had a carting company, and they would just throw it in the garbage truck and it would go to the Fountain Avenue dump and never to be seen again. And that was the Gemini method.
So this was a highly efficient way?
Very efficient. It was like an assembly line. Everybody had their job. And I mean, it got down to the point where I'd been in the apartment where there was a body hanging in the shower and they were sitting in the kitchen just eating meatballs and spaghetti, you know, just waiting for it to bleed out. You know, so it didn't matter to them, you know.
All that mattered was money. Human life was cheap. In the new year of 1979, they bought $500,000 worth of cocaine in Miami, killing the suppliers to avoid payment. The drug deal and the double cross had been set up by Chris, Roy's right-hand man, who changed his name to DeMeo because he wanted to be his son. But this time the DeMeo crew had gone too far. Amongst their victims were well-connected Cuban drug dealers. The Cubans investigated what had happened and sent a hit team to New York. Dominic Montiglio acted as the intermediary between the Cubans and the Mafia.
There was the Cuban crisis that their crew murdered 5 people on a drug deal. It was a father and son, 2 Jewish guys, and 3 Cubans. And I was hanging out with like one of the top Cubans in New York, Pedro Rodriguez. They used to call him Paz. And he came up to me at his apartment one night and showed me this name. And it was Chris DeMeo. I immediately knew who it was, even though he used, you know, it was Chris, was Roy's right-hand man.
Pedro Rodriguez had a team of 20 Cuban gunmen ready to go to war. When they discovered who was responsible for the double cross, they made an arrangement. His execution would be sufficient revenge for the murdered Cubans and the stolen drugs.
And Pedro told me that all the Cubans in Miami wanted was Chris. Because there was Chris, Joey, Anthony was involved. All they wanted was the guy that set it up. They wanted it done where it would be in the newspapers. They wouldn't just take our word that, you know, the guy was gone. I had to be with the Cubans every day now, because Roy knew that the only way to resolve this thing was to kill Chris. And the Cubans wanted it done, and he wasn't moving on it. And it was, I guess, about close to a month. And I had to go over with these Cubans. I mean, I was carrying 2 pistols at the time, every day. Because I knew one thing: if the Cubans were going to make a move on the DeMeo crew, I wasn't never coming out of that apartment. So I was pressing for Roy to to do this thing. What happened, the final straw, was there was a kid named Dominic Ragucci who was working his way through college selling vacuum cleaners. And if I'm not mistaken, he was half Puerto Rican, half Italian. And he was doing his paperwork in front of Roy's house. And at this point, Roy had become so paranoid. I mean, he was seeing Cuban hitmen behind the trees. He thought this guy was laying out to blow his house up or something. And it was in the middle of the day, in the afternoon. And him and Joey Dracula, who was his cousin, Joey Guillermo, they took off after they came walking out with pistols. When the kids saw the pistols, he took off in his car. They jumped in the car, and they started chasing him. And this is broad daylight. They drove from the South Shore of Long Island to the North Shore of Long Island, going fast. Roy shooting out the window and driving, and Joey reloading the guns. And Joey's so nervous as he's reloading the gun, he's shooting holes in the floor of the car. And finally, this kid Ragucci, they hit something, they stopped him. And from what the witnesses say, from what Roy told me, he just took like a military stance and shot the kid like 9 times. It came out who this kid was. He was just, a kid working his way through college, and that was it. Roy got called down on it on a Monday night, and Nino told him, get rid of Chris, settle this problem, because we can't bother with this anymore. You're starting to get wacky on me. And they killed Chris, and they parked him in a car by Floyd Bennett Field, by the Marine Park Bridge, after they killed him. And they went by the car and they machine gunned it. So it would make the newspapers. It was just a regular killing, might not make the newspapers, and had to make the newspapers, which it did. And I think that was the closest we came to having a war with someone other than the family in all the time I was ever with them. Because, the Cubans had sent people up from Miami. They were ready to go, So, but that's the point that Roy had gotten to. He was so paranoid, and it just spread throughout the crew. And Danny Grillo, they murdered him. Chris, they murdered. They just started killing each other.
The Civil War dispensed justice Mafia style. Those that survived became the targets of an FBI NYPD task force. It was one of the most significant cases in the FBI's war against the Mafia. Time was running out for Roy DeMeo.
As I got to know the gory details of this crew, it became more and more a personal war with the Mafia, that we should destroy an organization of this magnitude and that is capable of committing these heinous crimes. And it was with great satisfaction that we brought them down and prosecuted them.
From a nondescript office in Queens, Bruce Mao still runs a team of agents targeting the entire Gambino family. The murderous exploits of the DeMeo crew were just one of his early investigations. As his agents tracked the DeMeo crew, Bruce Mao and the Gambino squad were also targeting the highest levels of the Mafia. The strategy was to connect the crimes of the soldiers on the street all the way up to the Godfather himself. It was on the streets of Little Italy at the Ravenite, the Gambino family's Manhattan social club, that the police and the FBI had John Gotti under surveillance. Angelo Ruggiero was Gotti's top lieutenant. The overweight gangster never stopped talking. He was nicknamed Quack Quack, and the FBI had planted a bug in his house.
Transportation is your transportation, so you're eliminating that. We're gonna pay for that. Yeah, what are you giving the guy? I don't know yet. I don't know how many you got coming in.
About 20, 30, 20. No, I'm looking crazy. We're gonna talk about the guy said you may find a different place.
The FBI tapes proved that Ruggiero was supervising a massive drugs operation, even though Castellano had outlawed drug dealing. The talkative wise guy was also overheard discussing the internal affairs of the family.
So we learned a tremendous amount of information about the inner workings of the family, a lot of their criminal activities. We learned about meetings up at Castellano's house. For example, Ruggiero used to go up there on Sunday a lot with John Gotti. Ruggiero returned back to his house, invite Gene Gotti over, and then Angelo would tell Jeannie exactly what transpired that afternoon up in Paul's house, from A to Z, the whole format. The next phase, following the Ruggiero electronic surveillance, was to go after the hierarchy. And based on all the conversations that we intercepted in Angelo's house, we had probable cause to bug the house of Paul Castellano, who was the boss of the family at that time.
Ruggiero's indiscretions enabled the FBI to get a warrant to break into the White House, Castellano's Staten Island mansion.
There was an alarm system, and it was activated, and we figured we probably had about 25 or 30 seconds to deactivate it. We used a computerized digital scanner, electronic device which somehow goes through 10,000 possible combinations when aimed directly at the control panel, and comes up with the combination of that particular system. It worked, and it's just a matter of punching in the number, the 4-digit code, which Andy Kearns did, and that deactivated the system, glowed green instead of red, and we were in. When we left, we had to reactivate the system the same way, and lock the door and go out. We made provision for a sanitation truck to stall out in the road, preventing the security guard from coming upon us. He would have to detour all the way around, give us about another 4 minutes. Base contained a power pack and battery, which powered the mic during the day when the lamp was off. Then when the lamp was on at night, that would in effect power the bug and recharge the battery for the next day.
The entire operation took just 12 minutes. Half a mile away, the FBI, posing as commuters, rented an apartment above a doctor's surgery. Agents Andy Curins and Joe O'Brien would monitor the bug night and day.
We had broken. We're not broken. We always argued the point. At one time we stepped out of line where I remember respecting your father at extension child. We think you stand a good chance to win this election. But I think it should be at least 50-50. You feel that way about it? Go ahead. It turned out to be a mistake because they had 5%. Not 50%. But they blew it. In the meantime, we had to take all these repercussions.
What was your own personal feeling when you first heard the voice of Paul Castellano coming through on the boat?
I was ecstatic. I was really excited.
Why?
It was the highlight of my career, because I knew that the FBI had just legally monitored a conversation which would lead to Godfather's downfall. He'd go to jail, spend the rest of his life in jail. because of those conversations. And there's no way he could get out of them. These were his own words. He was talking about criminal activity, conspiring to commit other crimes, extortion, talked about loan sharking, control of unions, murder, the whole gambit of racketeering activity.
As Castellano was conducting the family's business from his home, the FBI were able to eavesdrop on the high-level visitors who came to pay their money and their respect.
There's only 27 there, so I got to pick up a few more tomorrow. I'll take 15 out there. Okay, that's good. There's only 12 minutes. There's 12 more. I got to pick up 3 more. John gave us over. John gave us over. Now, Dean gave us over.
The bug provided like a 4-month window into the operations of the de facto headquarters and nerve center of the Mafia in America. Paul Castellano was the chairman of the commission, the boss of bosses, the godfather, ruled over all the families, and was the head of the Gambino family. And here, the FBI had a bug in his house, listening to conversations.
At the same time as the Castellano bug was producing damning evidence against the Godfather, other agencies were accumulating hundreds of hours of tapes on other major Mafia figures. For the first time, they had cast iron evidence of the activities of the Commission, the Mafia's secret government.
It showed how the different families divided up the turf, if you will, in these different industries, and how they all shared the profits, and how the bosses of the families belonged to what was later referred to as a club. They would determine which mob-connected family was going to bid on a particular job, high-rise construction job in Manhattan, and who would not, and whose turn it was. That's the way it worked.
The tapes revealed that as well as running the Mafia, the Commission controlled the entire construction industry of New York. A club had been set up to carve up the contracts between 4 families. The 5th family, the Bonanno family, had been banned because of their wholesale heroin trafficking. The cartel owned the unions that ran the labor sites and the companies that supplied the concrete.
All concrete, high-rise business in Manhattan was controlled and dominated by organized crime. The 4 families that were sitting on the commission at that time each had their own concrete companies that they controlled, their own cement pouring companies they controlled. But in order to dominate the whole city, they had to come together. And the commission gave them the mechanism to coordinate and carry out their scheme to extract a tax from everybody who was pouring concrete in the city for years.
Castellano himself owned several construction companies. Surveillance showed businessmen arriving at his house on Staten Island to seek the Godfather's blessing on major building contracts. One of his partners in crime was the boss of the Genovese family, Fat Tony Salerno. The FBI had bugged his headquarters, a social club in Upper Harlem. It confirmed the multi-million-dollar payoffs from construction. The evidence against the commission was mounting.
2% of the money had to be extracted and divided up among the commission. So if you consider that there have to be hundreds of millions of dollars a year in concrete high-rise work in the city of New York and on the island of Manhattan, it had to be the case they were making tens of millions of dollars every year, just from this aspect of their control over the building trade.
So every building, every skyscraper that went up in New York City, they would be getting millions of dollars from.
Exactly.
As law enforcement agencies gathered a wealth of intelligence on the leadership of the Mafia, the New York police were making headway on the streets. Their joint task force had been set up with the FBI to investigate links between the Mafia and a series of killings in the Canarsie section of Brooklyn. Their biggest break came with the chance arrest of Vito Arena, a Mafia hitman who had stolen hundreds of cars for Roy DeMeo. What he had to say sickened even the most hardened detectives. Now the finger pointed clearly at Roy DeMeo. Before they could question him, the Mafia moved first.
His wife reported him missing that evening that he had been murdered. And the reason that she reported it early was it was his daughter's birthday. And he was supposed to bring the cake home, and they were having a birthday party, and he never showed.
The contract to kill Roy had been issued by the Godfather himself, Paul Castellano. It is believed that Montiglio's uncle, Nino Gaggi, set him up.
The Gambino family found out that Roy had killed numerous people without any kind of authority. He'd gotten out of control, he'd become dangerous. So they decided to kill him because of his own killings, for lack of a better word.
When Castellano got wind that the task force was moving in on Roy, he couldn't risk the chance that DeMeo might turn and become an informer and point the finger at him. The Godfather hoped that if DeMeo disappeared, so would the investigation.
And I think they felt that if they killed him at that point, because it was the DeMeo crew, if they killed him at that point, I think they thought that it was going to stop the task force from further investigation. You know, because he was like the head target in their minds. I think they felt that if they killed him, it would cool down. You know.
He had bullet holes through both hands, where he tried to defend himself, and then he was shot through the chest and in the head. Pretty good job, and also very much like the DeMeo crew type killing. I had to say when I saw Roy there that this was real justice. Roy got what was coming to him.
Why?
Because of all the people he had killed, innocent people he had killed, and all the suffering he had brought on those families, loved ones. Nobody should be able to do that.
But DeMeo had got away with it for years, causing untold misery to his victims and their relatives. One of them was Jackie Todaro, a 19-year-old law student. Her father had a film laboratory in Manhattan. The DeMeo crew realized its potential for the growing pornography business. Jackie's father did not want them to take control of his business. Today she's been left with little more than her childhood memories.
I remember in particular one day building a snowman with me and my sister on the front lawn. He's building the snowman and we were helping him, knocking all the snow off of his shovel, and he had a lot of patience with us. He loved us and we loved him.
There's Gabby, he's talking to the snowman.
For years after his disappearance, the Todaro family suffered the uncertainty of not knowing what had happened.
So how can Gabby talk to the snowman?
They never found his body. They never found any part of the remains of his body. We never had a funeral. We never had a memorial service. We didn't know. I mean, we just didn't know. We lived with complete uncertainty.
Sadly, Jackie, who was just 5 when her father was murdered, was not alone in her bereavement. The DeMeo wing of the Gambino family will go down in history as mass murderers.
How many people do you think he killed?
May may have killed 200 to 300 as a crew. But Roy personally, I would say 50 to 60. He certainly used to brag about those numbers.
Dominic Montiglio narrowly avoided becoming another of their victims. Although he denies taking part in any of their murders, he admits dealing drugs. That was enough to get him in trouble with the family. He was also accused of stealing $250,000 from the Mafia.
There were stories all around New York, and I got accused of being a heroin dealer, which I never dealt heroin. I dealt a lot of drugs, but never heroin. And that Paulie Castellano himself had to sit with Funzi Thierry, who was at the time the head of the Genovese family, and straighten that one out. And then I got a call one night, and just from somebody I'm not going to mention, just somebody inside, and said, Dominic, it's time to leave, and they're going to pop you.
Montiglio escaped to California, but made the mistake of coming back to Brooklyn. He was arrested and heard that the Mafia was planning to kill him in jail. The only way out was to betray the Gambino family and become a government witness.
I guess it was a Saturday morning. I called, I guess it was the FBI, the strike force, and they got me out of there. I was out of there like within an hour. You know, it was a short time.
68-year-old Paul Castellano, described as the boss of a 20-man crew that ran an extensive...
Now a witness could testify from the inside to the links between the crimes of Roy DeMeo and the most powerful godfather in America, Paul Castellano.
That included 25 murders.
Later, separate charges were brought against the commission. Fat Tony Salerno, boss of the Genovese family, was arrested. Paul Castellano was also indicted on the commission case, mortified to hear that the FBI had managed to bug his home. Anyone facing problems from incriminating conversations recorded on tape. Tapes from an earlier FBI bug revealed activities within the family that even the Godfather was unaware of. These tapes in turn would trigger an extraordinary chain of events that would ultimately lead to his downfall. In the 1980s, John Gotti was earning hundreds of thousands of dollars for the Godfather. What Castellano did not know was that much of the money was coming from heroin trafficking operations. Castellano and fellow commission bosses like Tony Ducks Corallo had forbidden drug dealing in the Mafia on pain of death. A bug inside his Jaguar recorded the Mafia leadership's opposition to drugs.
You can't be in the drug business without going in the fucking street and selling the cops every shit. We should kill them. We should have some example. All right? All right. We should make some example. Other people ain't like us. They talk a lot, you see. They bring it in the right places. Don't worry. They know what they're doing. Themselves, that's like an informant to me. See? They call it, they know what they're doing, but they go talk. the lawyers and stuff there. We'll kill the place cocksucker, you know, we'll kill him. Anybody with us, anybody near us, you know, we'll kill him. Don't worry, that gets to the fucking ears.
They just let certain people do it, big time, and that was usually heroin. And the rest of us, the rule really was just don't get caught. It wasn't don't do it. They said it was don't do it, but the rule was don't get caught. You know, because then you can get killed.
Paul had a dual standard when it came to narcotics dealing. Technically, the Gambino family was against any kind of narcotics dealing. If you were caught dealing narcotics or even suspected of dealing narcotics, the penalty was automatic death. You were killed immediately for dealing narcotics. But Paul had two faces in regards to this. If he liked you, he would look the other way, condone in his own tacit way the narcotics dealing. He'd get the money from it, and he'd benefit from it. If he didn't like you, he'd enforce the edict and had you killed. So it was like a dual standard.
Ruggiero was picked up on bugs, talking about heroin.
Ruggiero was facing a life sentence from the courts and a death sentence from the Mafia. Before the case came to trial, Castellano wanted to hear the evidence for himself.
Castellano and his people were demanding access to the bugs, and obviously Ruggiero didn't want it turned over because it demonstrated unmistakably that he and his closest associates were involved in narcotics trafficking. So they were trying to keep these tapes away from Castellano, and sort of mediating this dispute between the Gotti faction and Castellano was Neil Delacroce.
Castellano ordered Delacroce, the underboss of the Gambino family, to collect the tapes from Ruggiero's defense lawyers. Delacroce held a series of meetings with Gotti and Ruggiero at his Staten Island home. Ironically, the FBI had a bug in his sitting room too.
I'm going to tell you something. If you two never bother with me again in the rest of my life, I ain't giving up anything. If you never bother with me again the rest of my life, I can't. There's good friends of mine on them fucking tapes. It was some fucking asshole like Buddy or somebody like that. I give it to the 3 seconds flat. There's good guys on them fucking tapes.
One of the good guys was Eugene Gotti, a major drug dealer and John Gotti's brother.
No, you could get right. I could get right. You could get right. I'm not stressed already. I can't stop the guy from always bringing it up. Unless I tell the guy, hey, why don't you go fuck yourself? And stop bringing these tapes up. Then all we got to do, then we don't roll up and go to war.
Going to war was the only alternative if they didn't obey Castellano and surrender the tapes. Delacroce's warning was prophetic. He died of cancer on the 2nd of December 1985, and without his protection, Gotti was dangerously exposed. One Mafia insider heard the details of the dispute from his uncle, a fellow Mafia boss.
Paul Castellano was complaining to my uncle one time about these guys in his family that are dealing with drugs. And right away, we were thinking of his cousins. But he didn't mean his cousins. He meant John Gotti and this Angelo Ruggiero, because there were tapes that these fellows were on that Paul was trying to get, and he was complaining to my uncle that these guys aren't giving him the tapes. And he wants them. And he said, we can't have drug dealers in our family. So we talked to a few people, and they told us the story about John Gotti and Angelo, that Paul, the difference between them and the underboss, Neil Delacroce. So eventually, there was a hit put out on John. John told us this. Paul wanted to kill him. And he found out about it, and he moved first.
Jesus Christ, they're right next to us.
murder of Paul Castellano proved to be a turning point in the history of the Gambino family and the war against the Mafia.
He's gone.
Next week, the story of the mafioso who became the most notorious godfather of them all, John Gotti.